It's scary how easy it is to ruin great villains. This is something we've already seen in Eden Zero, and it's something we might be seeing again right now. If you follow Eden Zero, then you know that it's praised for having a bit of a darker tone than Mashima's previous story, Fairy Tail. Well, for the most part anyway. We'll get into why that isn't exactly the case after the recent chapters later in the video. But even though it stands out on its own, Eden Zero still has a lot of familiar tropes. One of them being how Mashima likes to give some of the villains redeeming qualities. There is a spectrum to this, of course, with characters like Dr. Mueller and Crow being on the irredeemable end. But beyond that, things get a bit tricky. See, sometimes Mashima adds a twist to a villain, and it works really well, or at the very least, doesn't hurt their character. Then there's times where he adds one little thing, and suddenly I hate the character. The difference between how it should be done and how it shouldn't be done is a very subtle one, and yet it's the most important factor in preserving what people love about a villain. So for example, let's start with how it shouldn't be done. And unfortunately, I have to use Shura for this one. See, Shura is actually so toxic that it's charming. When Aoi War was releasing weekly, everyone said the same thing. I love to hate Shura. And how could you not hate Shura? He treats everyone and everything like garbage, and in turn makes himself look like human garbage. And that makes him a great villain. Unlike a cartoonish Hanna-Barbera villain like Dr. Mueller, Shura is a genuinely evil person. He's not after world domination or anything like that. He just loves hurting people and being a troll. Something all too real for anyone who spent like 2 seconds on the internet. And this is why everyone loved Shura. Until Mashima wrapped up his character arc, and he starts crying about how he's worthless, he's a monster, nobody loves me. Now, whether you find this scene as a redemption of his character is up to you, but at the very least it's meant to make Shura a more sympathetic character. The vulnerability is intended to allow readers to relate to Shura's self-hate. But here's why the scene is so divisive. A lot of people hate the scene because it feels like a last-second effort to change how we look at Shura, and it absolutely is. You can apply this understanding of Shura after the fact, and it is possible to infer this aspect of his character before you find out about it. But the problem is that Shura never exhibited any behavior that actually reflected this part of his character. So when we do find out about it, it almost spits in the face of everything he was about. He goes from unhinged troll to crybaby who just needs a hug in one scene with no real build-up. The real problem is Shura is this objectively terrible person for the entire arc, with no hints of vulnerability or redeemable qualities, and then we're suddenly supposed to feel sorry for him. It doesn't ruin his character, but it at least hurt how I ranked him among the other villains of Eden Zero. Now, that's Shura. He's a pretty simple case. We could get into Ziggy, but there's a lot going on there. We still don't know how everything happened with him, and whether you like it or not, his twist is honestly a toss-up. You either hate it or you love it. So, let's talk about where Mashima made one subtle change with Drakken Joe that made all the difference in the world. Actually, before I do that, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. Now, you might think the final scene with Drakken Joe isn't all that different because he's all weak and vulnerable, but there's at least a couple reasons why it is. First of all, there's actually build-up. When Shiki is beating Drakken Joe, we get that flashback of a young Drakken Joe talking about how his desire for power is connected to a deep desire for friends. We had Drakken Joe regularly talking about how important it was that he maintained his power, and we had Shiki on at least one occasion mention that he would be Drakken Joe's friend. Totally different than how Shura was handled as far as build-up. And on that note, this build-up made it so that what we got in the end was entirely in line with Drakken Joe's character. He was obsessed with power, and what you can call his vulnerable moment reveals that he was working towards gaining power at a very young age. Unlike Shura, it's not this aspect of Drakken Joe that we never got any glimpse of. It was something shown to be an integral part of who he was. One subtle change of just a little bit of build-up, and it makes all the world of difference. The end result being this. Whereas Shura is more sympathetic in the end but loses part of his original character, Drakken Joe is shown to be more vulnerable and still retains everything about his original character. And that idea of retaining character is going to be crucial as we move into the recent development in Eden Zero. In the newest arc, in which Shiki and the crew have reached Universe Zero and have traveled back to a separate timeline, Shiki declares that he's going to make Drakken Joe and Shura his friends. Understandably, a lot of people are kinda pissed off about this. Which, to be fair, is very reasonable considering this isn't the first time Mashima has retroactively threatened the integrity of his villains. First of all, this kind of goes against the tone that's been set as Eden Zero has progressed. It started out fairly tropey, you know, pretty in line with friendship and all that, but then the story got darker as it moved forward. There were moments where Shiki would brighten things up, but for the most part, Eden Zero had a dark tone. So now this whole let's make the big bads our best buddies thing could switch things back. And of course, the other potential issue is the fact that this could ruin Shiki and the two villains by making them cornier than they really are. But now that we've already looked at how he's handled these villains in the past, let me explain why I'm not really worried about these two going forward. I'm not going to talk too in depth about Shura only because we're not even there yet, plus all of what I'm about to say will relate to him as well. So let's talk about Drakken Joe, or I should say Universe Zero Drakken Joe, and that's kind of my first point. The Drakken Joe we know is done. His arc is complete and we dealt with him in Universe whatever it was. This is Universe Zero now. Brand new Drakken Joe. Same character generally, but he does not have the same memories as the original. To put it in video game terms, it's like the same game on a new save, meaning whatever we do with this character is completely separate from the original. Same character, different timelines. So you can love the new version or you can hate him, but the original canonically stays the same. Regardless of what happens, the original character retains all of his qualities. But even with that being said, let's explore the idea of Shiki befriending Drakken Joe. Now, a lot of people don't like this idea. Again, fair enough. Drakken Joe is a mean dude who's all about money and power, so it would be kind of awkward if he suddenly started crying and asking to be friends. But let's not forget that this is in character for Drakken Joe. Drakken Joe, at a very young age, expressed a desire to make friends. It's essentially his entire motivation, even if it's been suppressed to a subconscious level. So to be in a new timeline, Universe Zero, the universe of possibilities, and to have Drakken Joe be redeemed in this universe, then it only makes sense to redeem him by having him make his first friend. He can still be the badass that he is and retain most of his character, which is why I'm not that worried about his redemption. The whole point of redeeming a character is to make them more likable as a character, while preserving what initially made them who they are. That's exactly what we talked about earlier when we compared Shura and Drakken Joe, and it's exactly what Mashima can do again now that he seems to be redeeming these two villains. Now, you naysayers and skeptics out there might call me out and be like, listen, you're making an awful lot of assumptions here. How do you know they're gonna retain their original characteristics? And you know what? You're absolutely right. There is the possibility that one way or another, Mashima takes things just a bit too far and makes this whole redemption arc painfully corny. If that ends up being the case, then it's only natural that Drakken Joe and Shura will end up losing their charm as badass villains. In that case, it would be as if they're not just separate characters from before, but now they're entirely different characters. They would almost be unrecognizable besides their designs. In this scenario, we'd still have the original characters and their original arcs to enjoy, but now their new portrayals would be so bad, they'd be so corny, that it would inevitably leave a bad memory. But personally, I don't see things going that far. For the most part, Mashima has more or less nailed it when it comes to villains in Eden Zero. There have been some lackluster side villains at times, and some of the villains in the Kaede War were hot ass to say the very least. But the only real issues that come up usually only happen as a result of poor build-up. Cure? Completely rushed and no build-up. Shura? Great character, but no build-up in the end. Build-up is that one little thing that seems small, but time and time again makes the difference between ruining a villain and making them a fan favorite. That is what Mashima seems to know by now, and that is why I'm looking forward to what he does with two of our favorite villains. But now I'd like to hear what you think. What do you think will happen to Shura and Drakken Joe? Will this ruin Eden Zero? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another Eden Zero discussion like this one, then check out my collab with Axel Beats where we compare Eden Zero and Fairy Tail. In that video, we talk about the plot of Eden Zero versus the characters and nostalgia of Fairy Tail. You can find it in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.